This morning, after nearly 7 years inside the Ecuadorian Embassy, Mr. Assange was arrested for failing to surrender in relation to his extradition proceedings. He was later also served with a warrant for provisional arrest, pending receipt of a request for extradition to stand trial in the United States on charges relating to computer offences. The Metropolitan Police entered the embassy for the purpose of arresting and removing him. All of the police's activities were carried out pursuant to a formal written invitation signed by the Ecuadorian ambassador and in accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. The decision as to whether any statutory bars to extradition apply would be for the UK court to determine. I will go no further in discussing the details of the accusations against Mr. Assange, either in the UK's criminal justice system or in the US. Mr. Assange will now have the opportunity to contest the charge against him in open court and to have any extradition request considered by the judiciary.
But on this side of the House, we want to make the point that the reason we are debating Julian Assange this afternoon, even though the only charge he may face in this country is in relation to his bail hearings, the reason we are debating this afternoon is entirely to do with the whistleblowing activities of Julian Assange on WikiLeaks. It is this whistleblowing activity into illegal wars, mass murder, murder of civilians and corruption on a grand scale that has put Julian Assange in the crosshairs of the US administration. Julian Assange is not being pursued to protect US national security. He is being pursued because he has exposed wrongdoing by US administrations and their military forces. And we only have to look at the treatment of Chelsea Manning to see what awaits him if he's extradited to the US.
Yeah, I think the whole country, if they listen to her response, they will be pretty astounded by the tone that she has taken. And she talked, first of all, she started talking about the reason for Mr. Assange's arrest and tried to come up with all sorts of justifications herself which have nothing to do with the reason. The reason Mr. Assange has been arrested is because he failed to surrender to a UK court. There's no one in this country that is above the law, and the Right Honourable Lady, who we should remember wants to be the Home Secretary, is suggesting that we should not apply the rule of law to an individual. That's right, she's disagreeing sitting from her position, but she is implying, she's saying actually quite clearly that Mr. Assange should be not subject to UK law, and that is something that should worry any British citizen should she ever become Home Secretary. I will. She can intervene later if the Speaker allows her. That's possible. But I do wish to finish my comments in response. So why is it, Mr. Speaker, that whenever someone has a track record of undermining the UK and our allies and the values we stand for, you can almost guarantee that the leadership of the party opposite will support those who intend to do us harm? You can always guarantee that from the party opposite.
But let me just say two things, if I may, Mr. Speaker. We should not allow Mr. Assange to get away with the idea, one, that he was arbitrarily detained, which is ridiculous when he could have walked out of that door any one time, and secondly, the fact that he had no charges to answer originally in Sweden, because the Swedish prosecutor would have needed to interview him personally, something that he never allowed her to do. Those two facts need to be put right in the middle of this ridiculous story.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned Sweden, because the Home Secretary didn't mention Sweden, and the fact that there were proceedings in Sweden which led, as I understand it, to the warrant being issued originally. Is it in fact the case that the Swedish proceedings will be continuing? And if there is any competitive aspect between the Swedish prosecution and the United States prosecution, how will that be resolved?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable gentleman that the original extradition request was a Swedish extradition request, but then at a later date the Swedish authorities chose to withdraw their request. Whether there is an existing or new Swedish request, I can either confirm or deny, and should there be for any individual more than one extradition request, that would be dealt in the usual way by the courts.
Will the Home Secretary confirm that any extradition request from the United States will be considered by the Home Office, and including in that consideration there will be a public interest test consideration and a press freedom consideration.
That will be, in the first instance, it's a matter for the courts. There will be, once a full extradition request is received, my department will receive that and we will determine whether it is certifiable or not. But after that, it will go to the courts, and the courts will have to make the initial decisions according to our law.
Julian Assange says, apparently, that his personal space has been violated, which is a bit rich considering the number of people who've been put in extreme danger among our allies.